So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jacob Louie. I'm an engineer in training at WSP from Toronto, Canada, and I've been working for WSP for almost 3 years. The vast majority of my work is just using Synchro for development applications and traffic impact studies. But today I want to talk to you about one of the peculiarities of the Toronto streetcar system, its impact on traffic, and how I try to model this in Vism. So for those of you who don't know, the streetcars have been running in Toronto continuously since 1861. And we were about to do the same thing as many other North American cities. We were about to do the same thing as many other North American cities and abandon our streetcar network outright and replace them with a network of buses and subways. But in 1972, the Toronto City Council, as well as the Toronto Transit Commission, changed their minds and decided to retain their mixed traffic streetcar system. Not because not for heritage purposes, not for economic development reasons, but primarily for operational reasons. They realized that streetcars actually had a much higher capacity than buses, and also provided better local access than the subway lines that they were providing. So today, Toronto has the largest traditional mixed traffic streetcar in the entire continent. They have over 50 miles of tracks and over 700 stops. Being the same system from over 100 years ago, the environment in which most of the streetcars run in or operate in has remained largely unchanged for over 100 years. Most of the streetcars run down the middle two lanes of 4-lane roads in mixed traffic. And the vast majority of our stops don't have any waiting platforms or safety islands. So here you can see in these two photos that at most of the stops, if passengers want to get on and off the streetcar, they actually have to walk across a live curb lane of traffic. And here you see the passengers waiting on the road just to get on the streetcar. So if you're having trouble visualizing how this works, here's an animation of this in action. So the streetcar arrives at the stop, passengers wait on the sidewalk, which should be gray. And when the streetcar opens its doors, the traffic stops in the curb lane, and the passengers walk across this curb lane. And this is the situation in most of downtown Toronto.
Can I interject for a second?
Yeah.
So do the cars actually wait in the curb lane? They actually stop for people?
Yeah, the cars wait in the curb lane. No signal heads are required. No traffic signals are required. The drivers basically use their eyes to see, are there pedestrians in front of me and are the doors open? So
Canadians are nice.
Yes. So long as the doors remain open, traffic must remain stopped. But as soon as the doors close, traffic can proceed.
So it is like a law that traffic does have to stop when there is pedestrians.
Correct, it is a law. There are warnings. It is a law for traffic to stop whenever the streetcar doors are open. And there are warning signs at the back of the streetcars. And I would say 99% of drivers do obey the law. How do I go to the next slide? Okay, there we go. So this is the primary reason why car advocates in Toronto hate streetcars. And even to this day, during every election season, we get mayoral candidates still proposing to rip out the streetcar network and still replace them with a network of buses and subways. So this is the phenomenon I try to model in Vism. So how do we consider the impact of blocking streetcars in our traffic studies, be it traffic impact studies or larger operational studies? So here's a typical example of what we would see throughout downtown Toronto. A 4-lane road running east-west, and the streetcar runs in the middle 2 lanes in mixed traffic, no safety islands. And if you're using Synchro to do your traffic study, the City of Toronto has actually published official Synchro guidelines providing guidance on how to take this into account. They say that if your streetcar service is frequent, you artificially omit the middle 2 lanes in which the streetcars run in, and model this roadway, model this 4-lane roadway as a 2-lane roadway in synchro. So this is how all the engineers in my department do it when they this is how all the engineers in my department do it. The other thing that the City of Toronto Synchro Guidelines says is that synchro is not a good tool to model the impact of streetcar blockages. So it's not a good tool, so they recommend to use microsimulation instead, which my department doesn't do much of. So if we were to try to do this in sim traffic, however, we would be using a lot of computer resources to microsimulate with incorrect lane geometries. So aside from sim traffic, there's also Paramix, there's AimSun, and there's Vism. So Paramix actually has a dedicated built-in setting that stops curb lane traffic behind the loading streetcar. I don't know if AimSun has a built-in setting, but to the best of my knowledge, I don't think Vism has a built-in setting yet dedicated to modeling this behavior. Vism does come with some various built-in tools where you can approximate this behavior roughly, but as I'll explain later on in my presentation, these tools aren't always realistic or reliable. So my goal was to build a tool dedicated to modeling the impact of blocking streetcars more accurately than what's possible using Vism's built-in tools. But more importantly, earlier this year, I had actually bought a $10 Python course, and I needed a project to practice my newly learned Python skills before I forget them. So in this presentation, I'll explain how do you use Vism's built-in tools to try to model this behavior as accurately as possible. Then I'll explain to you the tool that I developed. Then we'll see the script in action, and then I'll talk a little bit about the applicability and usefulness of this tool. Then that will be the end of the presentation. So I can think of 2 ways to model this using Vism's built-in tools. First is using priority rules, and the second is using detectors and signal heads. So for those of you who have never used priority rules, you simply put your green conflict marker where the traffic with the right-of-way goes over, and you put your stop bar here where the traffic should stop to yield to traffic. And I guess most of you have used priority rules at some point already. So, but the advantage of priority rules is that the geometry and the arrangement of priority rules is very flexible. So how do we adopt priority rules to streetcar stops? So what we could do is we could put our conflict marker here where we think the rear end of the streetcar will end up by the time it stops, and make the conflict marker activated only by streetcar type vehicles. And then we set that speed parameter or whatever it's called to a low speed. Then we put the stop bar right next to it here. So let's see how well it works in action. So those of you who haven't modeled public transit before in Vism, whenever the streetcar turns white, that means the doors are open. So it seems to work fairly well under free flow conditions. But let's see what happens in an urban setting at a signalized intersection. So we can see here, first what I should have done. I should have put more stop bars in the curb lane along the length of the streetcar stop to get the other traffic to stop. But the other thing I want to point out is, yes, traffic here stops when the doors are open, but they remain stopped for no good reason, even after the doors are closed. And so this causes curb lane delays to be unrealistically higher than in real life. Here's another example of how well priority rules work. Right, so we have a similar problem here, but it's worse because now the streetcar is too far away from the stop bar to safely open its doors. But because its body occupies the conflict marker, traffic in the curb lane still thinks that it needs to stop when it really doesn't have to. Again, causing unrealistically high delays than in real life. Now, we could try to do the same thing using detectors and signal heads, and we place our detectors where we think the streetcar is going to stop, and we place our signal heads where we think traffic should stop. But the problems are almost exactly the same as using priority rules, in that anytime the streetcar occupies a detector, that signal head is going to turn red and stop curb lane traffic, whether or not the doors are open. So the problem with both of these methods is that both of these methods neglect to consider one of the most important factors in whether or not to stop, and that's if the doors are open. So if a driver sees that the doors are open and people are getting on and off, they know that they should remain stopped. And if a driver sees that the doors are closed, even if the streetcar is still at a full stop, at a streetcar stop, they know that they can proceed past the closed doors at full speed in real life. And that's something that neither of these methods can consider. The other thing is that traffic should stop according to the location of the rear end of the streetcar, not at some imaginary painted stop bars painted on the pavement. So we want to build a tool that will get traffic to stop in the correct location. But we also want to build a tool that would we also want to build a tool that would get traffic to stop appropriately at the correct time. So to build a tool that considers all these factors, we have to define two components. So the first component is to define under exactly what conditions does streetcars actually block traffic in the curb lane, or what is a blocking streetcar. The second component that we have to define is, given the blocking streetcar, how do we get traffic to stop appropriately and at the correct time? So we can define a blocking streetcar as any streetcar type vehicle that's traveling in the middle lane, or not the curb lane, that's located within the stopping zone of a stop that lacks a safety platform or a waiting island. And if the streetcar itself hasn't come to a full stop, we want traffic to stop in anticipation of the streetcar stopping, even before the streetcar opens its doors. So the streetcar should be in the stopping zone, but also the speed of the streetcar should be low, and it should be actively decelerating or braking. Now, the other case is after the streetcar itself has come to a full stop. The other thing drivers need to ask themselves is are the doors of the streetcars open or closed? And if they're open, traffic should stay stopped. But if they're closed, traffic should be able to proceed at full speed. Once we know what a blocking streetcar is, we have to devise a way to get curb lane traffic to stop appropriately. So rather than using signal heads and priority rules, what I decided to do is add a dummy blocker vehicle in the curb lane with approximately the same length as a streetcar that it's serving, and placed approximately at the same link position of the blocking streetcar. And this dummy blocker vehicle gets added if the blocking streetcar counts that there are no dummy blocker vehicles yet added in the curb lane. And conversely, the dummy blocker vehicle also does its own count in terms of how many blocking streetcars are also nearby in the lane next to it. And if there are, the dummy blocker vehicle remains where it is. But if the dummy blocker vehicle counts that there are no more streetcars that qualify as a blocking streetcar anymore, then the dummy blocker vehicle removes itself. So these two components are used in a larger Python program that executes at every time step, in my case, 10 times a second. First, Python gets a list of all vehicles as well as their attributes, such as their vehicle type, their speed, their acceleration, their door state, and even their dimensions. Next, Python filters the list down to include only the vehicles that qualify as a blocking streetcar. Next, for every blocking streetcar in the resulting list, if there's no dummy blocker vehicle next to the blocking streetcar, add a dummy blocker vehicle to stop the curb lane traffic. And for every dummy blocker vehicle in the network, if there's no qualifying blocking streetcar next to it, remove itself. In this time step, we don't have to do that yet. But in the next time step, this program is repeated again. Python gets a new list of all vehicles in the networks as well as their new attributes. Whoops. Python then filters the list to include a new list of blocking streetcars. And for every blocking streetcar that doesn't yet have a dummy blocker vehicle next to it, add a dummy blocker vehicle. And for every dummy blocker vehicle that no longer has a qualifying blocking streetcar next to it, remove itself. So again, this process is repeated 10 times a second. So now that we know how the script works, let's do a quick demo to see the script in action. So we can see here that whenever a streetcar becomes a blocking streetcar, there's a thin vehicle that gets added to stop general traffic. And then we see here, because I wrote in the name of this stop that this stop has a waiting island, then traffic doesn't have to stop in the curb lane over here, but they do over here.
Excuse me. Can you point it out which one, because there's multiple stops there?
Yes, okay. So I could play the animation again. So this stop here, I changed the name of this public transit stop to say blocker, or to include the word blocker. And so Python checks to see if the streetcar is in a stopping zone whose name includes the word blocker, meaning that there's no safety island. And if the word blocker does not appear in the name of the public transit stop, then it's not necessary to stop the curb lane traffic. So this one has a safety island. These ones do not. And these ones have safety islands. These ones have safety islands. So it's not necessary. In fact, there's no curb lane to block traffic here anyway. So yeah, let's watch the animation again. Okay, now, the difference between engineers and salespeople is that engineers who never criticize their own work are nothing more than salespeople. So before I push my script on Toronto traffic engineers to use, I do have to admit that my script does slow the simulation down by a lot. Sometimes my simulation runs 10 times as slowly. So I can spend more time and effort to try to optimize the Python script a bit more. But perhaps the more important question is, do we really need a script to run this? Or can we get away without using a script and just fall back on priority rules? When we use priority rules and we see them fail, are the resulting curb lane delays really that unacceptably high? Or do we just say, our analysis is just conservative? In other words, how highly do we value model realism and accuracy versus simulation speed? And if your answer is, you want as much model realism and accuracy as much as possible, there are a few other conditions that you might want to check and ask yourself whether or not the use of the script really is justified. The script is really helpful if your stopping position of the streetcar at the same stop is unpredictable between streetcars. For example, this could be caused by if you have short residual queues at the end of every green intervals, which would block streetcars, or if you have queue spillbacks originating at a downstream intersection that would cause blocking problems. Maybe you have left turns that would block streetcars from proceeding once it finishes loading. Or maybe you have multiple streetcars stopping at the same stop, maybe from multiple overlapping streetcar routes, where one streetcar could stop one behind the other. So if you have conditions like this, chances are you have pretty good reasons to use a script. But if you don't have any conditions like that, and you do a test run to see if the streetcars always stop in the same exact location every time, chances are you could probably get away with using priority rules and allow your simulation to run much faster. Anyways, that's the end of my presentation, but before I open the floor to questions, I would like to force you all to watch the 3D animation of my script in action. So here is an example of a stop serving multiple overlapping streetcar routes. And the new, longer, low-floor streetcar will turn right, and then the streetcar behind it will go straight through. And you may notice that there's a mistake in the signal controller, but I didn't have time to re-record the video, but I fixed it though. So. Okay, I think I might as well open the floor to questions now. So since it's a fairly long video, yeah, I hope this was interesting. Yes. Yeah.
Did you run the script outside of VISIM or as part of the inside of VISIM?
So the question was, did I run the script within VISIM or outside of VISIM? When I first developed this script, I ran it on Python 3, so it had to be done outside of VISIM. And when I ran the script outside of VISIM, I was able to look up ways to try to optimize my code and see and get Python to tell me which components of my program are taking the most time. Later on, when I had to share this VISIM file with other people, I had to convert my Python program to Python 2 so that from then on it could then be run as a script embedded within VISIM.
Did you notice a difference in speed once you embed it? It should have been faster, right?
Yes, so as a Python 2 script used directly within VISIM rather than being run externally, the script does run much faster. Yep.
Did you look at reducing how often the script runs so that maybe the script only runs twice a second instead of 2 times per second? Would that improve the speed, do you think?
So the question was, did I consider running the script less often rather than at every time step, maybe at every second time step or less frequently? I considered it very briefly. I didn't put much thought into it, but I was afraid that running the script less often would mean that some dummy blockers would be removed at the wrong time or be added into the network next to the streetcar at the wrong time. So I haven't pursued that option much further. Did you have a, yeah, yes?
Noticing some vehicles are just, if they're already beside the streetcar, they would stop and kind of block the boarding and lighting. Is that what's in real life as well in Toronto? Is that the law there, that they have to stop even if they're blocked?
Yes. So the question was, even if vehicles are not behind the streetcar by the time they get blocked, but rather if the vehicles are beside the streetcar, and then the doors open, the law requires that all vehicles behind the streetcar as well as beside it should stop. For example, and that law is written for a good reason. For example, a car could be trapped between 2 doors. A car could be ahead of a door but behind the other door, but the car really should stop for the door that it gets caught behind. So yes, all vehicles that are beside the streetcar or behind it should stop. But if a vehicle is slightly ahead of the nose of the streetcar, it should be free to proceed. Yes.
Did you submit a feature request for having a feature like this where vehicles are stopping behind a streetcar?
So did I submit a feature request? Not formally, but I did ask about it on the LinkedIn forum whether or not such a feature, a dedicated feature existed. I posted that on LinkedIn 5 years ago. I haven't gotten any responses, but the reason, Lucas, do you remember me posting about it or like, or? Okay. Oh, yeah, sorry to put you on the spot. But yeah, like when I saw Paramix had a pretty dedicated built-in setting for this, like even though it's a pretty rare phenomenon around the world.
Not really. It happens quite often in Germany and Berlin, and they do the same thing sometimes.
Really? Oh, okay. Oh,
It also happens in Boston with the Green Line. Certain areas of the Green Line, they have, stopping in the center lane,
Mhm.
and people have to cross and people have to stop. So it's not uncommon.
Oh, okay. That's good news for me then. So, so yeah, I did ask about it, but I didn't submit a formal feature request yet.
No,
So.
I think it's a good one that we should at least take a look at.
Squeaky wheel.
Okay. Sure.
Squeaky wheel.
Yeah,
Just email them every week.
Sure.
Where's my button? Where's my button? Where's my button?
So like here's the thing. I don't know if AIMSUN already has a feature request, but I know Toronto is trying to use AIMSUN more, but I don't know how effective AIMSUN is or how use I don't know how well AIMSUN is able to model like the downtown area, especially where streetcars are. But I do know that aside from the streetcar blockages, I do know that there are really good advantages of using VISM, especially for turning streetcars, like getting right turning streetcars to interact with through curb lane traffic. I can't do that in Paramix. I tried to do it in AIMSUN once. I only spent 10 minutes trying, but I was not able to do it. Maybe someone who knows AIMSUN more is able to do it. But I was able to get turning streetcars and through traffic to interact successfully in VISM. So, yeah.
And as well, I was trying to figure out, we have a new pedestrian feature called Dynamic Potential, where the pedestrians can walk between cars and kind of figure out how to get around cars. And I'm just thinking in my mind, how can we get this included into this model as well? So, I don't know, maybe we can ask Finn to kind of come up with a new example. So look at this.
Well, I think if you have the platform area there and then move from there with a normal pedestrian route which contains that option, it should work.
So let's see what happens in VisWalk. This is like a blooper. This is like a blooper version. I had to cut this out of the main presentation, but I did try a third built-in way using VisWalk and conflict areas. So I put a link over the curb lane where pedestrians should walk across. So I mean, I find conflict areas to be pretty finicky in this context. But even when the doors are still open, traffic is driving across because they see a gap in pedestrian traffic between the sidewalk and the streetcar. So I can't get traffic to stop alone using VisWalk alone. I mean, maybe I could spend more effort trying to get this to work correctly, but yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.